Did the 1960s produce better thrillers than today, only for weak marketing, lost prints, and careless television schedules to bury them? Tonight, we reopen 37 forgotten cases filled with missing children, false identities, secret experiments, and quiet betrayals. Some of these vanished films still feel dangerously modern today. Before we begin, like this video, share it with another classic film fan, and subscribe to the channel today. Number 37, Fear No More, 1961. A train journey becomes a nightmare when Sharon Carlin wakes beside a dead woman and is ordered to carry a mysterious suitcase. Before she can explain anything, the evidence disappears, witnesses contradict her, and the police begin treating her as the problem. The story pushes Sharon through stations, roads, and unfamiliar rooms, while every answer creates another trap. One tense moment comes when she returns to the compartment and finds that the scene has been cleaned away, making her sound completely unreliable. Mala Powers plays the fear without turning Sharon into a helpless victim. She keeps thinking while panic closes in. The film borrows Hitchcock's wrong person tension, but its rough edges give it nervous energy. It vanished because it lacked a major campaign and soon became difficult to see. Yet its central idea remains effective. The most frightening conspiracy is one that erases the proof before anyone believes you. Number 36, The Sleeping Car Murders, 1965. A woman is found dead in a sleeping compartment after an overnight train reaches Paris. Inspector Grazzi begins questioning the passengers who shared the carriage, expecting one of them to hold the answer. Instead, those witnesses start dying, and the investigation becomes a race to understand what the original crime concealed. The train sequence is immediately gripping because strangers sleep only a few feet apart while remaining unknown to one another. Curtains, narrow corridors, tickets, and berth numbers create a temporary community that disappears at the station. Once the passengers scatter into Paris, Grazzi must rebuild that community from statements and small observations. Yves Montand gives the inspector weary intelligence, while Simone Signoret and a young Catherine Allegret appear among an ensemble in which every character seems to possess a separate private story. Costa Gavras, making his feature debut, moves between police procedure and the lives of ordinary suspects. One memorable scene follows a witness through the city, while the audience realizes that being questioned has placed that person in danger. The murders are connected not simply by guilt, but by knowledge. Someone is eliminating possible links before the police learn which detail matters. Flashbacks revise earlier assumptions, and apparently minor encounters return with new importance. Paris is lively rather than romantic, full of offices, apartments, cafes, and streets where a person can be followed without noticing. Despite the director's later fame, this first film became harder to find internationally and was overshadowed by his political thrillers. That complexity is precisely why it rewards attention. The famous final explanation reveals how chance, desire, and opportunism turned one train journey into several connected crimes. Grazzi succeeds by separating what passengers saw from what they assumed. The film understands that witnesses do not merely forget facts, they organize them into stories. A clever killer survives by making sure everyone remembers the wrong story first. If these first two mysteries already surprised you, press like and subscribe before the trail gets darker. Now let us uncover the next forgotten thriller together, starting right now today. Number 35, The Name of the Game is Kill, 1968. Heat and suspicion greet Hungarian drifter Simca Lipa when he becomes stranded near an isolated Arizona home occupied by a mother and 3 daughters. Their hospitality seems generous, but every conversation carries a warning, and the family's stories never agree. The key set piece comes during a gathering when affection suddenly turns into accusation, leaving Simca unsure whether he is a guest, a target, or part of an old ritual. Jack Lord plays him as a man hardened by the past, while Susan Strasberg and Colin Wilcox Paxton make the sisters impossible to read. Empty roads and blazing daylight remove the usual shadows, yet the danger feels stronger because there is nowhere to hide. Its advertising begged audiences not to reveal the ending, but limited distribution meant few people saw it. Beneath the twists is a sharp thriller about loneliness and the danger of accepting comfort from people who need you for reasons they refuse to explain. Number 34, The Satan Bug, 1965. Deep inside a desert laboratory, scientists have created biological agents so dangerous that one broken container could become a catastrophe. When several vials disappear, former security specialist Lee Barrett is called back to investigate. The stolen material includes the so-called Satan bug, an organism described as capable of spreading beyond control. Barrett must identify the thief before the weapon reaches a crowded city. The film's most effective sequence begins with the discovery inside Station 3. Doors stand open, alarms offer too little information, and trained personnel lie silent where they should be working. Instead of showing chaos, Director John Sturges emphasizes the frightening neatness of the laboratory. Glass containers, labels, and sealed rooms carry more tension than an army of villains. Later, the search moves toward Los Angeles, where ordinary streets become terrifying because the threat is invisible. George Maharis plays Barrett as practical and skeptical, while Richard Basehart brings calm intelligence to a story in which intelligence itself may be corrupted. Unlike colorful science fiction adventures, this thriller treats disaster as an administrative failure. Codes, security checks, and official confidence mean nothing if the wrong person understands the system. The pacing is patient, and that patience probably contributed to the film's disappearance. Audiences expecting action found long investigations and technical conversations. It also arrived between larger Sturges' successes and was rarely promoted as one of his important films. Today, its quiet seriousness feels remarkably modern. The danger is not a monster that can be seen and defeated. It is a process that may already have started, while officials debate what to announce. One memorable confrontation forces Barrett to judge whether a threat is real when the cost of guessing incorrectly is enormous. That is the film's lasting strength. It makes suspense out of uncertainty, responsibility, and the terrifying knowledge that a tiny object can hold consequences far larger than anyone in the room. Number 33, Blindfold, 1966. A respected psychiatrist accepts a strange government assignment: treat a brilliant scientist at a secret location while wearing a blindfold during every journey. Dr. Bartholomew Snow is told the precautions protect national security, but secrecy soon makes him look guilty to the scientist's suspicious sister. The film's cleverest scene follows Snow as he uses sounds, turns, and smells to guess where he has been taken, transforming an absurd restriction into a detective problem. Rock Hudson plays the doctor with dry humor, while Claudia Cardinale brings energy to a romance built on distrust. The conspiracy involves agents, hidden motives, and a patient whose knowledge is valuable enough to invite betrayal. Although lighter than many films here, the suspense works because Snow is denied the one thing a psychiatrist needs: a clear view. It faded because audiences expected either serious espionage or full comedy. That uneasy mixture is now its charm, proving even an expert in behavior can be manipulated by people controlling the route. Number 32, Hysteria, 1965. Memory is the first missing piece when an American wakes in a British hospital after an accident and cannot remember his name, his past, or why someone paid for his recovery. A mysterious benefactor provides an apartment, but the gift feels like surveillance. At night, he hears a woman crying through the walls, then finds clues connected to a nearby murder. One eerie scene has him follow the sound through the building, opening ordinary doors until the silence behind them becomes unbearable. Robert Webber keeps the hero uncertain without making him foolish, and every helpful stranger hesitates just enough to seem dangerous. Director Freddie Francis uses stairways, mirrors, and narrow rooms to make lost memory feel physical. The film arrived during a flood of British mysteries and was treated as a disposable second feature. What makes it effective is not simply amnesia, but the fear that a new identity has already been prepared for the hero before he can recover the old one. Number 31. The High Commissioner, 1968. An Australian detective travels to London expecting a simple arrest, only to find his suspect is a senior diplomat involved in sensitive peace negotiations. Scobie Malone carries an old murder warrant for High Commissioner James Quentin, but assassination attempts force him to protect the man he came to take home. The strongest sequence turns a formal public event into a danger zone, with Malone scanning polite faces while an unseen attacker waits. Rod Taylor gives the detective blunt energy, and Christopher Plummer makes Quentin charming enough to keep guilt uncertain. The plot mixes political pressure, family secrets, and the problem of enforcing law when governments prefer delay. Released under different titles, the film struggled to build a lasting identity. Its suspense remains fresh because Malone is trapped between justice and responsibility. Arresting Quentin may be legally correct, but doing it too soon could damage negotiations and leave both men exposed. The thriller asks whether truth matters when institutions decide timing matters more. Number 30, The Venetian Affair, 1966. Venice offers beauty without safety when former intelligence officer Bill Fenner investigates why an American diplomat attacked a peace conference and then died. The official explanation sounds complete, yet Fenner finds suggestions of chemical influence, secret conditioning, and an organization capable of turning respectable people into weapons. A striking scene sends him through canals and shadowed interiors, while familiar landmarks become a surveillance maze. Robert Vaughn plays Fenner as tired rather than heroic, a man returning to espionage because journalism cannot explain what happened. Elka Sommer, Felicia Farr, and Boris Karloff add uncertain alliances, and no conversation feels private. The movie replaces Bond fantasy with paranoia about mind control and political manipulation. Audiences expecting colorful adventure found a colder, more complicated story, and television prints weakened its atmosphere. Even so, the central fear survives. What if a public act of madness is actually the final step of a hidden program? The answer leads Fenner through a city where masks are worn for survival. Number 29. The Collector, 1965. Freddie Clegg is a lonely bank clerk whose sudden financial freedom allows him to buy a country house. He has spent years observing art student Miranda Gray from a distance, and he decides that if he can keep her near him long enough, she will eventually understand and love him. He abducts her and locks her in a carefully prepared cellar. The most famous scene involves Miranda being allowed outside under strict conditions. Open air, trees, and sunlight appear close enough to promise escape, yet Freddie's control remains absolute. When a possible rescuer approaches, Miranda must communicate danger without openly alarming her captor. Samantha Eggar turns every glance into strategy, while Terrence Stamp makes Freddie quiet, formal, and frighteningly convinced of his own fairness. William Wyler avoids treating the story as a conventional chase. Much of the film becomes a battle over language. Freddie calls Miranda his guest, speaks about respect, and presents small privileges as proof of kindness. She tries anger, sympathy, reason, seduction, and psychological pressure, searching for the version of herself most likely to survive. Their conversations reveal a class conflict as well as obsession. He resents the confidence and culture she represents, while wanting to possess them through her. The movie was acclaimed in its time, but it later fell behind Wyler's larger classics and the decade's more famous shockers. Its uncomfortable intimacy may also explain why it is discussed less often than its influence deserves. The cellar remains one of the great thriller spaces because it has been designed as a fantasy of care. Freddie provides clothes, food, books, and art supplies, then expects gratitude for conditions he created. The final movement becomes devastating when illness introduces a problem he cannot control through locks. His response proves that he never wanted Miranda as a full person. He wanted a beautiful object that would confirm his idea of himself. Number 28. The Defector, 1966. An American physicist enters divided Germany to study art restoration and becomes trapped between intelligence services hunting the same microfilm. James Bauer is not a trained field agent, making every demand placed on him feel unfair and dangerous. CIA pressure pushes him toward a Soviet scientist considering defection, while an East German operative warns him away. One effective scene unfolds during a careful meeting where academic conversation hides coded questions, and every pause suggests someone nearby is listening. Montgomery Clift, in his final role, gives Bauer a worn dignity suited to a story about people used by larger systems. Hardy Kruger's opposing agent appears equally tired of the rules. Borders, checkpoints, and damaged buildings turn politics into geography. Released during a crowded period for spy films, it lacked spectacle and quickly faded. Its restraint is what makes it valuable today. Instead of celebrating espionage, the movie shows intelligent men pushed into pointless risks by agencies that can deny knowing them when anything goes wrong. Number 27. The Night of the Following Day, 1969. A young heiress steps off a plane in France and is quietly taken by a group of criminals who intend to hold her for ransom. Their plan looks organized at first: a false chauffeur, a remote beach house, strict roles, and a demand that should bring quick money. The trouble is that the kidnappers distrust one another more than they fear the police. Bud, played by Marlon Brando, shows flashes of sympathy for the captive, while Richard Boone's Lear treats every weakness as a threat to the operation. Rita Moreno and Jess Hahn complete a group already splitting apart before the ransom can arrive. The most haunting sequence comes at the seaside house, where the bright coast and open sky create no sense of freedom. The girl can see the world outside, but every doorway is controlled. Arguments move from whispers to open confrontation, and the camera keeps returning to ordinary objects that suddenly feel dangerous because no one in the room agrees about what happens next. Brando's unusual blonde appearance received attention, but the performance underneath it is tired, watchful, and morally divided. The film's structure is stranger than a standard crime thriller. It keeps interrupting certainty, and its ending forces viewers to reconsider the reality of what they have watched. That choice frustrated audiences who expected a clean kidnapping story. Production tensions and mixed reviews also pushed it out of regular circulation. Yet the movie deserves another look because it understands that a criminal plan rarely collapses from one mistake. It collapses when fear exposes the people carrying it out. The ransom is almost secondary. The real suspense comes from watching four unstable personalities discover that they are trapped together with no shared idea of loyalty. That uneasy moral collapse gives the film a strange, dreamlike aftertaste, as though the crime were doomed before the plane even landed. Number 26. The Liquidator, 1965. Brian Cooper looks like the perfect secret agent, only from a distance. He is handsome, decorated, and connected to a wartime act of courage that impressed intelligence officer Colonel Mostyn. The truth is less heroic. Cooper survived largely through luck, dislikes danger, and would rather enjoy meals than eliminate enemy agents. When Mostyn recruits him as a government liquidator, Cooper accepts the salary and lifestyle, then secretly hires a professional killer to perform the difficult work. That comic setup gradually develops tension. Cooper's arrangement seems clever until an assignment becomes personal and the people around him begin testing whether his reputation is genuine. One memorable sequence places him in a luxurious setting where seduction, surveillance, and assassination overlap. He tries to maintain the relaxed pose of an expert while every new arrival increases the chance that his fraud will be exposed. Rod Taylor plays Cooper with charm, but he also lets panic flash behind the smile. Trevor Howard gives Mostyn the dry authority of a man who never doubts the usefulness of other people. The film was marketed during the peak of spy mania, which became both its advantage and its problem. Viewers received a stylish mixture of comedy and danger, yet it was buried beneath more famous agents with clearer identities. Its tone also changes sharply, moving from fantasy toward consequences that Cooper cannot joke away. That instability may have hurt its reputation, but it makes the film more interesting now. The strongest idea is that national security can be built on a misunderstanding. One brave-looking moment creates a career, and a man spends years protecting the myth. When the substitute killer can no longer solve everything, Cooper must decide whether courage is something a person possesses or something he performs only after every escape route disappears. Its humor never cancels the danger. It only delays the moment Cooper must face it himself. Number 25. Mirage, 1965. During a blackout in a New York skyscraper, accountant David Stilwell discovers that parts of his life have vanished from his memory. A man falls from the building, strangers address David as though they know him, and the office where he believes he works appears not to exist. Even his apartment contains objects he cannot explain. The film's unforgettable early sequence follows David down a dark stairwell, while hundreds of workers evacuate. Emergency lights flicker, footsteps echo, and a brief encounter seems important, even though he cannot remember why. When power returns, the city looks normal, but David's reality has already broken. Gregory Peck plays confusion with quiet control, making the character's missing memory feel more frightening than panic would. Diane Baker's Shella knows more than she admits, and Walter Matthau brings welcome energy as a private detective hired to investigate a life that leaves almost no paper trail. Edward Dmytryk builds the mystery through urban spaces. Elevators, offices, rooftops, and crowded streets should provide witnesses, yet the conspiracy hides inside the size of the city. David gradually learns that his amnesia is connected to scientific work and information valuable enough to justify intimidation. Each recovered fragment makes him more dangerous to the people following him. The film was respected on release but became difficult to place beside Peck's larger dramas and the decade's more famous conspiracy pictures. Its title also became lost among many similarly named productions. Its power comes from making identity depend on routine. David knows how to dress, speak, and move through Manhattan, but those habits cannot prove where he worked or whom he trusted. The famous rooftop climax resolves the immediate plot, yet the deeper fear remains. Memory can be removed while the world continues acting as if nothing happened. A person may look completely normal and still be missing the fact that explains why someone wants him gone. Number 24. The Double Man, 1967. Snow-covered Austria becomes a trap after CIA officer Dan Slater learns that his teenage son has died in a skiing accident. Grief pulls him into the mountains, but small details suggest the accident was arranged to bring him there. The plot reveals a Soviet plan to capture Slater and replace him with a trained double who can enter American intelligence without suspicion. A chilling sequence places the real man and his imitation close enough for viewers to study their differences, while officials decide which identity to trust. Yul Brynner gives Slater a cold professional surface that cracks when his son's loss becomes tied to the mission. The alpine scenery is beautiful, yet the whiteness creates an exposed mood. Unlike glamorous spy adventures, this film treats identity as paperwork, posture, memory, and performance. It disappeared between louder Cold War hits, but its question remains disturbing. If an enemy copies your face perfectly, how much of you can be proved by facts alone? Number 23. The Third Secret, 1964. A respected London psychiatrist is found dead, and the official conclusion is suicide. His teenage daughter Catherine refuses to accept it. She believes one of her father's patients killed him, and she persuades American television commentator Alex Steadman to investigate the people whose private secrets were protected by the dead doctor. Each patient has a motive to hide something, but none wants to admit how well the psychiatrist knew them. The film's most memorable passages take place in quiet drawing rooms and offices where Steadman asks careful questions and receives answers that sound rehearsed. A toy manufacturer, an art dealer, and other apparently respectable figures become possible suspects because their calmness feels slightly forced. Catherine's certainty adds pressure, yet her own behavior is difficult to read. Pamela Franklin gives her a sharp, watchful presence, while Stephen Boyd plays Steadman as a man who begins with professional curiosity and slowly becomes emotionally involved. The title refers to the idea that every person has public information, private information, and a final secret hidden even from close friends. That concept shapes the entire mystery. The famous moment is not a chase, but the gradual opening of the psychiatrist's files, where written observations make absent characters feel present. Every page threatens to expose a life. The film disappeared because it sits awkwardly between detective drama and psychological study. It offers fewer shocks than Hammer's horror pictures and less glamour than the decade's spy films. Its muted black and white photography and serious tone made it easy to overlook. Yet the final revelation gives earlier scenes a new meaning and shows how dangerous certainty can become when grief chooses a suspect before evidence does. What remains powerful is the suggestion that therapy creates a map of human weakness. Once the person holding that map is gone, everyone connected to him has reason to fear who might read it next alone. Number 22, The Psychopath, 1966. 4 men connected to a wartime investigation are killed one after another, and a handmade doll resembling each victim is left beside the body. Inspector Holloway follows the dolls to a household ruled by Mrs. von Sturm, a German widow who lives with her withdrawn son Mark, and creates toys with unsettling precision. The crimes appear to be revenge, but the identity of the person carrying it out remains uncertain. The most memorable scene brings the inspector into the doll-filled house. Rows of painted faces stare from shelves while ordinary conversation continues beneath them. Nothing moves, yet the room feels crowded with witnesses. Director Freddie Francis uses the dolls not as supernatural objects but as physical accusations. Each one records a victim before the police understand why that person was selected. Patrick Wymark gives Holloway a stubborn, practical manner, while Margaret Johnston makes Mrs. von Sturm both fragile and controlling. The film came from Amicus during a period when British horror companies were better known for monsters and anthology pictures. This story is closer to a murder mystery, with family trauma, buried wartime guilt, and a police investigation driving the suspense. That uncertain genre identity may have helped it disappear. Viewers looking for horror found a restrained thriller, while mystery fans may have dismissed the lurid title. Its famous reveal works because the film keeps shifting sympathy. Mark seems suspicious, his mother seems protective, and the victims appear respectable until their shared past becomes clearer. What makes the movie worth recovering is its atmosphere of controlled resentment. The house is not chaotic. Everything has been arranged carefully, including the memories. The killer is frightening not because of madness alone, but because each crime follows a design that has been rehearsed for years. By the time Holloway understands the pattern, the final doll already suggests that the investigation may have arrived one step too late. Number 21. The Mindbenders, 1963. A scientist dies after apparently betraying his country, but colleague Dr. Henry Longman believes the man's behavior was altered by experiments in sensory deprivation. To prove it, Longman enters the isolation tank and allows intelligence officials to test whether a person cut off from sound, light, and touch can be reshaped through suggestion. The experiment succeeds more completely than anyone expects. The tank sequences are the film's unforgettable center. Longman floats in darkness wearing a heavy suit and mask while his breathing becomes the only reliable sound. Time loses shape, and the researchers outside speak about him with the cold distance of technicians examining equipment. When he emerges, they begin planting the idea that he no longer loves his wife. The real terror arrives not inside the tank but at home, where affection turns into hostility, and Longman cannot recognize the change in himself. Dirk Bogarde gives the performance several lives: confident academic, frightened volunteer, cruel husband, and man struggling to recover his emotional identity. Mary Ura brings pain and patience to the wife, who becomes evidence in an experiment she never approved. Basil Dearden keeps the science plausible enough that the domestic damage feels more disturbing than any machine. The film faded because it was difficult to market. It looked like science fiction, played like a Cold War conspiracy, and spent much of its second half examining a marriage. That mixture denied it an easy audience, although later films would explore similar ideas more openly. Its most controversial point remains sharp. The officials claim they are defending truth, yet they are willing to destroy a family to prove a theory. Longman volunteers his body, but no one asks whether his wife volunteers her trust. The thriller's danger is therefore not only brainwashing, it is the confidence of educated men who believe a successful experiment excuses every human cost created along the way. Number 20. Night Must Fall, 1964. A charming handyman enters the country home of widow Mrs. Bramson and quickly wins her affection. Danny is funny, flattering, and apparently harmless, but a missing woman and a suspicious suitcase suggest another identity beneath the smile. Mrs. Bramson's niece Olivia sees the danger before anyone else, yet she is also fascinated by him. The film's most famous scene involves Danny alone with the case he guards so carefully. He speaks to it, touches it with strange tenderness, and allows the audience to understand that the object carries more than stolen property. Albert Finney does not play Danny as a simple villain. He makes him childish, theatrical, seductive, and suddenly empty. That uncertainty turns every joke into a warning. Mona Washbourne gives Mrs. Bramson vanity and loneliness, explaining why Danny's attention defeats her common sense. Carol Rice opens the story beyond the stage origins of Emlyn Williams's play, using roads, woods, and the nearby lake to create a wider world. Yet the strongest tension still comes from rooms where people sit close together and pretend manners can control danger. Olivia's conversations with Danny are especially charged because each recognizes something in the other that remains unspoken. The film was overshadowed by the celebrated earlier stage and screen versions, and some critics disliked its modernized style. It also arrived when Finney was associated with rebellious working-class heroes, making this darker role harder to place. Over time, the movie slipped behind his larger successes. What survives is a study of charisma without comfort. Danny does not force his way into the house. He is invited because he tells each person what they want to hear. The suspense comes from watching affection become permission. Even when Olivia recognizes the truth, part of her wants to stay near it, and that dangerous curiosity gives the confrontation its unsettling power. The smile is always part of the trap. Number 19, The Running Man, 1963. Rex Black stages his own death after an insurance company refuses to pay a claim he believes it owes him. His wife Stella collects the money and joins him in Spain, where he lives under a new name and plans to enjoy the fraud. Their escape appears successful until claims investigator Stephen Maddox arrives at the same resort and begins taking an uncomfortable interest in Stella. The film's tension grows from social situations that should feel pleasant. Sunlit cafes, hotel terraces, and coastal roads become traps because Rex never knows whether Maddox recognizes him. One memorable scene places the three together in polite conversation while Rex performs the role of a stranger, and Stella struggles to keep details consistent. Lawrence Harvey gives Rex restless confidence, Lee Remick shows the strain beneath Stella's elegance, and Alan Bates makes Maddox friendly enough to be more threatening than an openly suspicious detective. Director Carol Reed uses the Spanish locations as a cruel contrast. The scenery promises freedom, yet his false identity requires discipline. A casual photograph, an unexpected question, or a familiar gesture could destroy everything. The plot also refuses to make the marriage simple. Stella loves Rex, but she begins to understand that his anger at the insurer has become an excuse for reckless control. The movie disappeared partly because it was neither a grand heist picture nor a dark domestic drama, although it contains both. It followed Reed's more famous classics and rarely received the same attention. A later action film reused the title, making searches harder. What begins as revenge against a company becomes a test of whether Rex can live without being himself. Maddox may be investigating, or he may simply be present, but paranoia makes no distinction. By the time the truth emerges, Rex has become his own most dangerous witness. Number 18, The Naked Edge, 1961. Years after office worker Donald Heath is convicted of murder, a letter arrives claiming that the wrong man went to prison. The message reaches Martha Radcliffe, whose husband George gave the testimony that secured the conviction and later became wealthy. Instead of comforting her, George's careful answers deepen her fear that he may have lied and possibly committed the crime himself. The story's most effective scenes take place inside the Radcliffe's home, where married conversation becomes an interrogation. Martha watches how George handles a newspaper, reacts to a name, or explains money from the past. Deborah Kerr turns suspicion into a physical burden. She wants to trust him, but every attempt to do so produces another inconsistency. Gary Cooper, in his final film role, uses his decency as part of the mystery. The audience knows his screen image, and the thriller quietly asks whether that image can be trusted. A standout sequence sends Martha searching through documents while George's return grows nearer. The suspense is simple: papers, footsteps, and the fear of being discovered doubting the person beside whom she sleeps. The film also returns to the original office killing, where a satchel, a witness, and a missing fortune created a story that may have been accepted too quickly. It vanished because its release was overshadowed by Cooper's death, and because the film seemed old-fashioned beside newer psychological thrillers. Yet that traditional surface is useful, respectability becomes camouflage, and marriage becomes the place where evidence is hardest to judge. The central question is not merely whether George is guilty, it is whether Martha can continue living with uncertainty after suspicion enters the house. Courts demand proof, but private life often operates on glances and instincts. That gap between legal truth and emotional truth gives the final minutes their force and keeps the film sharper than its forgotten reputation suggests. Even love becomes evidence. Number 17, Woman of Straw, 1964. Maria Marcello accepts a job caring for Charles Richmond, an aging millionaire whose money has made him powerful and cruel. His nephew Anthony offers Maria a secret arrangement: persuade Richmond to marry her, wait for his death, and share the inheritance. Maria dislikes the plan, but Anthony's charm and the promise of freedom slowly pull her into it. The most memorable scene comes after the marriage, when Maria realizes that the household no longer sees her as a nurse. Servants watch her, lawyers measure her words, and Anthony begins treating her less like a partner than a useful signature. Gina Lollobrigida gives Maria warmth and calculation without making her purely innocent. Sean Connery plays Anthony with polished confidence, while Ralph Richardson makes Richmond insulting, lonely, and unexpectedly human. The suspense grows from a simple imbalance. Anthony understands the law and the family history. Maria understands the sick man's moods. Each believes the other is necessary, but only one has prepared for betrayal. A crucial bedroom sequence turns a medical emergency into a moral test. Maria must decide whether to help the man she planned to deceive, while Anthony's instructions reveal how far the scheme has already moved beyond her control. The film faded because it was marketed mainly through its glamorous stars, which made it look like a glossy melodrama rather than a hard inheritance thriller. It also competed with more fashionable spy pictures and British crime films, yet its elegant surface hides a harsh story about class and ownership. Richmond treats people as objects because his fortune allows it. Anthony treats Maria the same way while pretending to rescue her from that world. The famous twist works because the movie has shown how contracts, wills, and appearances can rewrite guilt. By the end, money has not simply motivated the characters, it has changed the meaning of every kindness they offered one another. Number 16, Cash on Demand, 1961. On a morning just before Christmas, strict bank manager Harry Fordyce meets a visitor claiming to be an insurance investigator. The man, Colonel Hepburn, knows private details about the branch and calmly announces that Fordyce's wife and child are being held. Unless the manager helps empty the vault, his family will suffer. Almost the entire film unfolds inside the bank, and that limitation becomes its greatest strength. Hepburn never needs to shout. He controls Fordyce through information, timing, and the fear that every telephone call may be monitored. One brilliant scene has the two men discuss routine banking procedures while employees move nearby, unaware that their manager is being forced to stage the robbery. Peter Cushing makes Fordyce rigid and unpleasant at first, then gradually exposes the frightened husband beneath the rules. Andre Morel gives Hepburn charm, patience, and terrifying courtesy. The robbery itself is less important than the psychological reversal. Fordyce has spent years humiliating his staff and believing discipline can prevent disorder. Now he must depend on the people he has treated coldly. Hepburn understands this weakness and repeatedly reminds him that no one in the branch likes him enough to notice his distress. Originally made as a modest Hammer production, the film received limited attention and was sometimes treated as a secondary feature. Its lack of exotic locations or sensational imagery made it easy for television schedules to overlook, yet the small scale keeps the pressure exact. The famous vault sequence works because every movement has two meanings. To the employees, Fordyce is completing normal work. To him, each key and signature brings his family closer to safety or disaster. The final turn is satisfying not because of force, but because character matters. A manager who trusted only procedures discovers that human loyalty may be the one security system his attacker failed to calculate. The pressure never leaves the room. Number 15, Nightmare, 1964. Janet is sent home from boarding school after recurring dreams about her mother, who was placed in an institution following a family tragedy. At the estate, the nightmares become more specific. Janet sees a pale woman wandering corridors, hears doors opening at night, and begins to believe the same illness is waiting for her. The film's most famous sequence follows Janet through the dark house toward a room where a birthday celebration appears to be waiting. Candles glow, familiar faces seem frozen, and the cheerful setting slowly becomes something unbearable. Jenny Linden plays Janet with genuine confusion, while director Freddie Francis uses sharp black-and-white photography to make the estate feel divided between memory and design. The audience is encouraged to suspect madness, but the repeated visions are too carefully timed to be accidental. Halfway through, the story changes direction and reveals that Janet has been manipulated as part of a scheme. That twist does not end the suspense. Instead, the people responsible begin experiencing similar sights and sounds, suggesting that someone else has understood their method. Moira Redmond becomes central to the second movement, where guilt turns every hallway into a possible trap. The film vanished partly because it arrived among many Hammer psychological thrillers with similar titles, posters, and country houses. It was easy to confuse with other productions, even though its two-part structure is unusual. Some viewers also preferred the first half and dismissed the reversal that follows. Yet the repeated imagery gives the movie a nasty elegance. A nightmare is frightening when it belongs to one vulnerable person. It becomes even more effective when used as a weapon against those who created it. The final scenes turn staged fear into real panic, and show that manipulation can be copied. Anyone who builds a trap from another person's memories should remember that the same house has enough rooms to hide a second plan. Number 14. Paranoiac, 1963. The Ashby family has been damaged by death, inheritance, and years of emotional cruelty. Simon Ashby drinks heavily and expects to receive the family fortune, while his sister Eleanor remains fragile after the death of their brother Tony. Then a young man appears, claiming to be Tony, even though the family was told he died years before. The return should bring comfort, but it immediately creates suspicion. Simon sees an enemy who could take his inheritance. Eleanor sees the brother she has mourned. Their aunt wants the disruption controlled before old secrets surface. One of the film's most striking moments comes when a masked figure appears in the family chapel, transforming a place of mourning into a theater of fear. The simple mask is unsettling because it connects grief, guilt, and performance. Oliver Reed gives Simon a mixture of arrogance and panic. He can dominate a room, then collapse when the past refuses to stay buried. Jeanette Scott makes Eleanor vulnerable without losing intelligence, and Alexander Davion keeps the returned Tony difficult to judge. Director Freddie Francis fills the estate with staircases, locked spaces, and reflections that make identity feel unstable. The movie was one of several Hammer thrillers influenced by the success of psychological mysteries, and that crowded field helped erase it. Its title sounded generic, while later viewers often remembered Reed's performance without remembering the film around him. What makes it endure is the way inheritance becomes emotional poison. Every family member has learned to treat love as evidence and memory as property. The mystery asks whether Tony is real, but the deeper question is why the Ashbys need him to be real or false. The famous reveal works because the household has been performing normality for years. Once the performance breaks, the truth is not liberating. It simply shows how much damage was required to keep the fortune inside the family. Number 13. The Nanny, 1965. 10-year-old Joey returns home after spending time in a children's institution. His parents believe he is unstable, but Joey insists that the family nanny caused the death of his younger sister. No adult accepts his accusation. The nanny appears patient, devoted, and wounded by his hostility, while Joey refuses to eat food she prepares or remain alone with her. The film's strongest scenes turn care into suspense. A glass of milk, a bath, or a bedtime routine becomes dangerous because the audience cannot immediately decide who is telling the truth. Bette Davis avoids making the nanny openly frightening. Her control is expressed through soft words, attention, and the confidence of someone whose place in the household has never been questioned. William Dix gives Joey anger and fear in equal measure, making his behavior look suspicious, even when his warnings may be accurate. A memorable staircase sequence exposes the balance of power. Joey tries to reach safety while the adults interpret his resistance as another outburst. The house is full of people, yet he remains isolated because authority belongs to the person he fears. Wendy Craig and James Villiers play parents weakened by grief, guilt, and dependence. The movie faded behind Davis's larger late-career titles and was sometimes sold as horror, although it works more as a domestic psychological thriller. Its focus on childcare also made it less suitable for casual television viewing. What makes the story powerful is the question of credibility itself. Joey is not a perfect child, and the nanny is not a stranger. She has history, service, and adult respect on her side. The film understands that danger can remain hidden when a household protects its image. Its final explanation reveals trauma rather than a plan, but the suspense comes from watching a child discover that telling the truth means nothing when every listener has already decided who he is. Number 12, The Quiller Memorandum, 1966. British agent Quiller arrives in West Berlin after two colleagues are killed while investigating a hidden neo-Nazi organization. His superiors give him few useful details, and the enemy seems to know his movements before he makes them. Instead of gadgets and glamorous casinos, Quiller receives coded instructions, cheap rooms, and the uneasy knowledge that almost anyone may be reporting on him. The film's most famous sequence begins when Quiller is drugged and questioned by the organization's leader, October. There is no elaborate machinery. The interrogation takes place through calm conversation, while Quiller fights to stay conscious and protect the location of his own headquarters. George Segal makes him clever but not invulnerable. Max von Sydow plays October with controlled politeness, and Alec Guinness gives Quiller's superior a dry, unreadable authority. Berlin is more than a background. Empty lots, damaged buildings, new schools, and divided streets suggest that the war has ended physically but not ideologically. Quiller's relationship with teacher Inga appears to offer warmth, yet even romance becomes another question of loyalty. Senta keeps Inga sympathetic while leaving enough uncertainty to sustain doubt. The movie vanished in the space between two kinds of spy cinema. It was too quiet for viewers wanting Bond-style excitement and less severe than the bleakest John le Carré adaptations. Harold Pinter's screenplay also refuses to explain every motive, making silence part of the tension. Its famous final exchange lands because Quiller realizes that completing the mission does not restore trust. Information has moved through so many hands that victory itself may be another manipulation. The thriller's deepest fear is not that the enemy is powerful, it is that both sides use similar methods and expect agents to continue working after learning how replaceable they are. Quiller survives, but survival offers no clean answer about who truly controlled the operation. Its silences remain more revealing than speeches. Number 11. A Dandy in Aspic, 1968. Alexander Eberlin works inside British intelligence while secretly serving the Soviet Union under another identity. He has survived for years by controlling information and remaining emotionally distant. Then his British superiors assign him to locate and eliminate a Soviet agent named Krasnevin. The target is Eberlin himself. That impossible order creates a thriller built around performance. Eberlin must appear to hunt the man he is trying to protect, while both governments watch for hesitation. One memorable scene places him at a briefing where photographs and reports about Krasnevin are discussed by colleagues who do not realize their suspect is sitting beside them. Lawrence Harvey keeps his face controlled, but small pauses reveal the pressure of hearing his own life reduced to a file. Tom Courtenay plays Gatiss, an aggressive younger agent who suspects Eberlin and treats surveillance like personal competition. Their journey through Europe becomes a duel in which politeness barely covers hostility. Mia Farrow's Caroline offers the possibility of connection, but Eberlin has lived through deception for too long to accept intimacy without calculating its risk. The production itself carried sadness. Director Anthony Mann died during filming, and Harvey completed portions of the work. The final movie has an uneven rhythm, which contributed to mixed reactions and helped it disappear behind more celebrated spy films. Yet that broken quality also matches a protagonist whose identity has been divided beyond repair. The film's best visual idea is the contrast between Eberlin's appearance and the ugly machinery surrounding him. His clothes are precise, his manner refined, and his world almost empty. What keeps the movie compelling is its assignment. Most double-agent stories ask which side a man will choose. This one asks whether choice still exists after both sides have written the same ending for him. Eberlin can deceive individuals, but he cannot escape institutions that own every version of his name. Number 10. The Deadly Affair, 1967. A quiet investigation begins when British intelligence officer Charles Dobbs is asked to examine the apparent suicide of a government employee. Dobbs quickly notices details that do not fit, including inconsistencies in the dead man's background and signs that official embarrassment matters more than truth. His search leads through old friendships, private betrayals, and a damaged marriage. The standout sequence takes place during a theater performance, where Dobbs watches the audience as closely as the stage. Faces appear and disappear in dim light, and a public entertainment becomes a surveillance operation. Sidney Lumet uses London's winter streets and muted interiors to create a world drained of glamour. James Mason plays Dobbs with tired intelligence, making every discovery feel like another burden rather than a victory. The mystery is adapted from John le Carré's first George Smiley novel, but the character's name was changed because another production controlled it. That alteration may have weakened the film's identity and helped it fade behind the spy who came in from the cold. Yet Mason captures the essential sadness of a gifted investigator who understands other people better than he understands how to protect himself. Harry Andrews gives the police side of the inquiry blunt force, while Simone Signoret brings emotional complexity to a witness connected with the dead man. Dobbs's wife, played by Harriet Anderson, creates the film's most personal wound through an affair he cannot simply investigate away. The movie's suspense does not depend on a grand conspiracy. It comes from the knowledge that secrets spread across professional and private life until the two become impossible to separate. A clue about espionage may expose a friend. A question about loyalty may return Dobbs to his own home. The final confrontation is memorable because solving the case offers no restoration. Truth arrives, but it cannot repair the relationships damaged while everyone was hiding it completely. Number 9. Seance on a Wet Afternoon, 1964. Myra Savage believes she is a medium, but recognition has never come. She convinces her timid husband Billy to kidnap a wealthy family's daughter, then plans to use supposed psychic visions to help the police find the child. The crime will become proof of her supernatural gift, and Myra imagines the world finally listening. The film's famous seance sequence shows exactly how she controls a room. Curtains are drawn, clients sit in silence, and Myra speaks in the voice of her dead son while Billy watches from the edge. Kim Stanley makes the performance both convincing and desperate. Myra is not merely pretending for money. She needs the ritual to support a reality she has built around grief. Richard Attenborough plays Billy as frightened, devoted, and slowly aware that his wife's plan has no safe ending. Billy approaches the child in ordinary daylight, and that normality makes the act more disturbing. Later, the girl is hidden in a room while Myra moves through the house as though preparing for a professional appointment. Rain presses against windows, rooms feel damp, and every domestic sound threatens discovery. Brian Forbes avoids simple villainy here. The Savages are responsible for a terrible act, yet their marriage has a painful intimacy. Billy wants to protect Myra, while Myra treats his loyalty as evidence that her visions are justified. The most tense moment arrives when she proposes a step that would make the psychic story impossible to disprove. The film received major praise and award attention, but it gradually vanished from popular discussion because it lacked a famous franchise, a glamorous image, or a simple genre label. It remains one of the decade's strongest psychological thrillers ever. Its real subject is not the supernatural. It is the danger of a private belief becoming powerful enough to demand that other people live, suffer, and disappear inside it. Number 8. The Champagne Murders, 1967. Luxury becomes poisonous when a young man with memory gaps is drawn into a struggle over a profitable champagne business. Paul Wagner drinks heavily, loses time, and wakes unable to explain where he has been, making him an easy target when women connected to the family begin dying. The most unsettling passages follow Paul after a confused night in Paris, where music, streetlights, and faces return without forming a complete memory. Anthony Perkins uses fragile intelligence rather than open menace. Claude Chabrol surrounds him with elegant rooms and people who treat blackmail like polite conversation. The plot remains slippery, asking whether Paul is ill, manipulated, guilty, or all three. International versions and a complicated editing history left viewers with different cuts, and the film never gained the clear reputation of Chabrol's later work. Yet its atmosphere remains powerful because wealth protects nobody. It merely lets the family hide damage behind better manners. Every glass raised in celebration feels like evidence. Number 7. Taste of Fear, 1961. Penny Appleby returns to her father's home on the Riviera. Confined to a wheelchair following an accident, she expects an uneasy reunion, but learns that her father is supposedly traveling. His wife and the family doctor welcome her, yet their explanations remain vague. Then Penny begins seeing her father's body in different parts of the estate, only for it to vanish before anyone else arrives. The most famous scene takes place beside the swimming pool. Penny moves through darkness, catches sight of a figure beneath the water, and struggles to reach help while the house remains silent. The image is simple and unforgettable, a body suspended where reflections make certainty difficult. Susan Strasberg gives Penny determination as well as fear, refusing to let the character's disability reduce her to helplessness. Anne Todd makes the stepmother controlled and unreadable, while Christopher Lee plays the doctor with unusual restraint. Jimmy Sangster's script turns repetition into suspense. Each time Penny sees the body, the adults offer another explanation and her credibility weakens. The audience begins asking whether she is being manipulated, experiencing trauma, or uncovering a plan designed around her limitations. Director Seth Holt uses the estate's steps, narrow paths, and water to make movement itself part of the mystery. The film was overshadowed by Hammer's horror productions and was often treated as a minor black-and-white experiment, yet it may be one of the company's most precise thrillers. Its twists arrive quickly, but they grow from character rather than random surprise. What makes the movie endure is Penny's refusal to accept the reality prepared for her. The villains, whoever they may be, assume that physical dependence will make her easy to control. Instead, she watches, remembers, and tests every story. The final reversal is satisfying because the person treated as the weakest participant proves to have understood the game more clearly than anyone around her. Number 6. The Penthouse, 1967. A London apartment becomes a sealed arena when two intruders arrive after a couple's late-night party. Bruce and Barbara expect privacy, but Tom and Dick force their way inside, take control of the rooms, and begin a series of humiliating psychological games. The attackers are not interested in a simple robbery. They want obedience, fear, and the pleasure of making their victims doubt one another. The most disturbing scene does not depend on spectacle. Tom calmly reorganizes the apartment as though he owns it, while Bruce searches for a moment to resist, and Barbara realizes that every object around them can be used as a threat. The modern decor makes the situation worse. Nothing is hidden in shadows. The cruelty happens in a clean, expensive space designed to represent success. Susie Kendall gives Barbara a guarded strength, and Terrence Morgan lets Bruce's confidence collapse piece by piece. Tony Beckley and Martine Beswick make the invaders unpredictable because they shift between joking, politeness, and menace without warning. This was the kind of British thriller that arrived as cinema was testing new boundaries, but it never developed the lasting reputation of better-known home invasion stories. Its limited setting made it look small, while its uncomfortable power games made television programmers cautious. For years, it survived mainly through rare screenings and collectors. What keeps the film effective is its refusal to pretend that wealth or sophistication provides safety. Bruce's social confidence means nothing once the door is locked. The intruders understand that status depends on everyone agreeing to respect it, and they turn that knowledge into a weapon. The movie is tense because escape seems physically possible, yet psychologically distant. Every conversation becomes a negotiation over who controls the next minute. By the time outside help feels possible, the apartment has already revealed how quickly civilized behavior can disappear when two people decide the rules no longer apply. Number 5. Experiment in Terror, 1962. Bank teller Kelly Sherwood returns to her garage one night and hears a man breathing in the darkness. A hidden stranger tells her that he knows everything about her life, including details about her younger sister. Unless Kelly steals money from the bank, he promises consequences. He also warns her not to involve the police. The opening is one of the decade's great suspense scenes. The attacker remains mostly unseen, and his strained breathing becomes more frightening than a visible face. Lee Remick plays Kelly's fear with control. She listens, calculates, and understands that any sudden movement could expose her sister. After the stranger leaves, she contacts the FBI, bringing Agent John Ripley into a case where every normal routine may be watched. Blake Edwards directs with a seriousness far removed from his comedies. San Francisco streets, baseball stadium corridors, and suburban rooms become pieces of a surveillance network. Glenn Ford gives Ripley patience rather than swagger, while Ross Martin creates a criminal whose physical weakness never reduces his intelligence. The investigation moves through medical clues, false identities, and women previously approached by the same man. A famous later sequence unfolds during a night game at Candlestick Park. Thousands of people surround Kelly, yet the crowd makes protection almost impossible. Lights, announcements, tunnels, and moving spectators create confusion while the criminal attempts to complete his plan. Henry Mancini's music adds pressure without overwhelming the action. The film earned admiration but gradually slipped behind Edwards's lighter hits and Ford's westerns. Its procedural style may have seemed old-fashioned as thrillers became faster. Today, that detail is a strength. What makes the story last is Kelly's courage. She is frightened from the first scene, but fear never removes her judgment. The villain tries to isolate her by controlling information. Her resistance begins the moment she quietly decides that secrecy will not belong to him alone. Number 4. The Couch, 1962. Inside a psychiatrist's office, a polite young man calmly discusses his childhood while secretly planning attacks between appointments. Charles Campbell even warns the police before he acts, turning each telephone call into a cruel countdown. The most memorable sequence cross-cuts his therapy session with the growing police response outside. Grant Williams makes Charles disturbingly ordinary, never using wild gestures when a quiet smile is more unsettling. Robert Bloch's screenplay treats the couch as both a place of healing and a stage where a clever patient controls the conversation. The film is slow, but that pace lets viewers notice how adults hear warning signs and dismiss them. Released beside bigger psychological thrillers, it slipped from circulation and became a late-night title. Today, its idea of a criminal using therapy language to hide in plain sight feels more current than many celebrated films from the decade. Number 3. This Man Must Die, 1969. A young boy is killed by a driver who leaves the scene, and the police investigation produces no result. The boy's father, writer Charles Tenier, begins his own search. He records his grief and determination in a journal, promising to identify the driver, enter his life, and punish him. A damaged car and a chain of private connections eventually lead Charles to the home of Paul Decourt. The suspense does not come from discovering whether Paul is unpleasant. Michel Duchausseuil's Charles soon meets a man so arrogant and cruel that revenge appears easy to justify. The problem is the family around him. Paul's sister-in-law Hélène becomes emotionally close to Charles, and Paul's teenage son Philippe suffers under his father's control. Charles enters the household with a false identity, but genuine affection begins interfering with the plan. One memorable dinner sequence shows Paul humiliating everyone at the table while Charles quietly studies him. Conversation becomes evidence. The audience understands why several people might wish Paul gone, which makes the later mystery more complicated than a straightforward revenge story. Jean-Yann gives Paul confidence without charm. He dominates because the family has learned to avoid provoking him. Claude Chabrol keeps the camera calm, refusing to make grief visually extravagant. That restraint makes Charles's journal entries and private preparations more unsettling. He believes he is acting with moral clarity, yet every step requires deception. Distribution changes and title variations contributed to its disappearance. It deserves recovery because it questions the satisfaction promised by revenge. Finding the guilty man does not restore the child, and entering Paul's family reveals other victims whose needs do not match Charles's plan. Charles discovers that punishing one man may require destroying people who already hate him. The thriller's real mystery is therefore not who caused the tragedy, but whether grief can pursue truth without becoming another form of harm. Number 2. Bunny Lake is Missing, 1965. Anne Lake arrives at a London school to collect her young daughter Bunny, but no teacher remembers seeing the child. Bunny's classroom has no belongings, her name is missing from the register, and the staff insists that Anne may have misunderstood the arrangements. Police Superintendent Newhouse begins investigating, yet every missing piece of evidence makes Anne appear less reliable. The film's famous opening titles by Saul Bass show paper being torn away, an image that perfectly introduces a story about absence. Otto Preminger then moves through a London that feels both modern and strangely old. Schools, pubs, hospitals, and cramped flats become places where records matter more than emotion. Carol Lynley plays Anne with urgency, while Laurence Olivier keeps Newhouse patient but skeptical. Keir Dullea, as Anne's brother Stephen, offers support that gradually feels too intense. One unforgettable sequence occurs in a repair shop filled with damaged dolls. The scene is disturbing because a child's toy becomes the only physical proof that the child existed. Later, a visit to an eccentric former school owner adds another layer of discomfort, showing adults fascinated by children for reasons that have little to do with care. Its unusual tone, shifting between police procedure and family nightmare, made it hard to categorize. The presence of the zombies on a pub television also tied it strongly to its moment, which may have caused later audiences to underestimate its darkness. The final movement reveals that the disappearance is connected to obsession inside the family, not an outside stranger. A children's game becomes a trap, and Stephen's calm behavior breaks apart. What makes the film last is Anne's battle against administrative disbelief. She knows Bunny is real, but knowledge without evidence leaves her almost powerless. The story asks a brutal question. How quickly can society erase a person when every official record says that person was never there? Number 1. Stranger in the House, 1967. John Sawyer was once a respected lawyer, but years of drinking and disappointment have left him isolated inside a large London house. His daughter Angela moves through a fashionable young crowd he barely understands. When a man is found dead after a party, suspicion falls on Barney, a young outsider connected to Angela's friends. Sawyer reluctantly returns to the courtroom to defend him. The film's strongest scene begins not in court but inside the house after the party. Music, stylish clothes, and careless conversation suggest freedom, yet the discovery of the body exposes fear beneath the confidence. Each young person remembers the night differently, and their wealthy parents immediately begin protecting reputations. James Mason makes Sawyer exhausted, bitter, and still capable of noticing what everyone else misses. Pierre Rouve relocates a Georges Simenon story to swinging London, using the generation gap as part of the mystery. Angela's friends speak about honesty while hiding their loyalties. The courtroom climax allows Sawyer to recover his professional force. He does not simply present evidence, he exposes the comfortable assumptions that shape the case. A witness's hesitation, a family's secret arrangement, and the group's treatment of Barney reveal how class can decide guilt before a trial begins. Geraldine Chaplin gives Angela a mixture of affection and resentment, making Sawyer's return to responsibility emotionally complicated. The film almost vanished completely. It received uneven distribution, became difficult to see, and was overshadowed by louder portraits of 1960s youth culture. That disappearance is especially unfair because the movie captures a society performing modernity while protecting old privilege. Sawyer solves the murder by entering a world he dislikes and recognizing that its rebellion is partly cosmetic. Beneath the music and fashion, the same families still decide whose future matters. The final victory is therefore limited. One man may be cleared, but the system that nearly buried him remains standing. These 37 thrillers did not vanish because they were worthless. They vanished because studios changed, prints disappeared, television ignored them, and newer titles took their place. But suspense does not expire. A locked room, a doubtful memory, or one polite liar can still hold an audience decades later. Tell us which forgotten film deserves a return, and which thriller we missed. Like the video, subscribe, and keep old cinema alive before another masterpiece disappears.